they're bleachers.
All right, we are live.
Guys like that.
In theory. Lesson 3, Irreconcilable. Continuing our look at the Pharisees and Jesus. And I think today, I don't know if there's anything real deep that you don't already kind of know, but just to refresh and review some of the reasons why the Pharisees were the way they were. And again, I think we've made this point, we'll make it again. Perhaps what started as good intentions just got out of control. And we're going to talk about here at the beginning, where is there something to separating from people who are sinning? Is there something to keeping yourself away from people who would lead you down a wrong path? Sure, absolutely. There's something to that. But at what point you separate yourself so much from the world that now you become, in your mind, better than the world, and I'm up here and they're down here, and well, then you've lost the point of Jesus, right? That he's came for sick people, he's came for sinners. And you were once one of those too, and you still are. So that's where we're going to have kind of a disconnect, where they just let it get out of control. But anyway, so lesson 3, you see there at the top from Mark chapter 2, familiar verse. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Psalm 1, verses 1 and 2. Let's start there. And the follow-up question, what thoughts or principles in those two verses would appeal to a Pharisee, knowing what you know about them? Psalm 1, verses 1 and 2.
I can do it.
Okay.
Blessed is the man who does not walk in the advice of the wicked, who does not stand on the path with sinners, and who does not sit in a meeting with mockers. But his delight is in the teaching of the Lord, and on his teaching he meditates day and night.
So give examples how you might apply those words in your life, and what would be appealing to a Pharisee reading those words.
Don't hang around with people that you know are, doing something wrong.
Yeah.
So it was what we tell kids all the time. Don't hang out with them if they're gonna get you into trouble.
Right. Don't be shocked if you get in trouble. You're hanging out with troublemakers.
Yeah.
Eventually, yeah. I think it's one of Paul's epistles, bad company corrupts good character. Kind of just a proverbial statement, right? Bad company corrupts good character. And so that, don't walk in the way of the wicked. Don't stand in the path of sinners or sit in a meeting with mockers. So, and again, you're a Pharisee hearing that. What's going through your head?
Well, I don't do those things.
Yeah.
What's that?
They think I don't do those things.
Yeah, I mean, the more I stay away from those people, the better, right? And why would anyone want to associate with those people? In fact, God tells us in Psalm 1, don't sit in their counsel, don't stand on their path, don't walk in the ways they walk. So some truth to that, right? That's the word of the Lord. That's Psalm 1. That's the very first psalm, the very first couple verses of the psalm. But again, we're going to see it just got too far, where they got so separated from the world that they in their mind became above the world and better than the world, and being so frustrated when Jesus was hanging out with the muck and the grime and the sinners, and like, well, how can he be from God if he's, and maybe in their mind, breaking Psalm 1 by hanging out with those people?
Maybe ignore it, and when they got to the point where they're ignoring the outreach part of it.
Sure, there was no outreach. It was, this is how you're supposed to live, and that's it. End of story. Yeah. Yep, very good. A little Hebrew. Strong hint to understanding the Pharisees and their clash with Jesus lies in their name. It comes from the word perushim, which means the separated ones. They separated themselves from Gentiles, from non-Pharisaic Jews, and in particular from the common people known as the Am Haaretz, the people of the earth. Thinking of the Pharisees' strong emphasis on rules of cleanliness, one could say they literally considered those people as the great unwashed common folk among the Jews. Nevertheless, in spite of their apparent disdain for them, the Pharisees exercised considerable influence over the common people. Remember again, the Sadducees were kind of the aristocrats. They were the temple bigwigs. And the Pharisees were more the blue collar, were with you in the synagogue, were in your everyday life. You're going to see the Pharisees The Sadducees were kind of the elites, and they were kind of up here. They were rubbing elbows with the Romans, and people kind of had a lot of disdain for the Sadducees because of that. Where the Pharisees were all about being a blue-blooded Jewish child of Abraham, son of Moses. I think just maybe the blue-collar term we use today is more, that's who the associated with the Pharisees. They taught a strong religious ethic with little or no emphasis on doctrinal questions. They addressed the question, how should we live? And they expounded the so-called oral Torah. Just remind me again, the oral Torah, what was that all about? The oral law.
God said these things too, we just didn't write them down.
Yeah, so Moses, he said this to Moses, and then there's more to the story that wasn't written down there, and that's, we figured that out. So we're trying to put a fence around the Torah by adding things to it to make it difficult for you to transgress. So I know he didn't say that in Exodus, but if you do this, this, and this, then you for sure aren't going to break what he said in Exodus. And that's where the oral Torah came. And that was always kind of evolving with time. That was sort of changing as the decades went on. Question number 1. So we got through the intro and the separatists, and now we're on question 1.
The emphasis on how should we live?
Yeah, so the emphasis on how should we live is a key concept in understanding the Pharisees. And it sounds like a wholesome question for a God-fearing person to ask. From what you know, what went wrong, or where did they veer from the truth?
They took it to the max.
Keep going. Yeah, when did it become sinful? Why Jesus is so frustrated with them?
When they thought themselves better than others and they were above the common folk.
Yeah. And what is the common folks' hope for being with God then? If what were the Pharisees' message? What were they sending to them as far as a relationship with God? How do you get there?
Doing good works.
By doing, just do better. Here's what pleases God. Keep the Torah. And here's all these different ways you can keep the Torah. And Jesus' message was what? And how did that just fly in the face of the Pharisees?
Just believe in me and you'll go to heaven.
Yeah, and he didn't say get rid of good works. What did he say about the good works?
Well, he said to do them, just like don't make them your higher priority over believing.
Yeah. And they're going to flow from your belief in me, right? I'm going to keep the law. I'm going to do the works of the law. I've come to fulfill them. And I'm not saying I'm getting rid of the law, but when you believe in me, that's maybe the vine and the branches. Remember that? Finish the sentence. I am the vine, you are the branches, and then what does he say? You don't have to get it exact, but paraphrase it.
No one comes, you're the vine. No one comes to me. Am I in the wrong one?
Yeah, that's okay. If you remain in me as I remain in you,
you shall be my
you will bear.
You will. Oh, I'm thinking something completely
That's
different.
okay. Apart from me, you can do nothing. But if you're in me, if the vine is connected to the branches and the branches are connected to the vine, the branches will bear fruit. And if they're not bearing fruit, then they're clearly not connected to the vine.
Yeah,
And they're
no,
dead branches.
I wouldn't have gotten that.
It's okay, you know it. So yeah, Jesus isn't getting rid of good works. He's just saying understand where they come from. They flow from that faith, which it starts with me, the one who did it all for you. And now so they got it backwards. I wouldn't even say they got it backwards. The whole first part they kind of got rid of altogether and just focused on the bearing fruit part.
But the Jews were supposed to be separate, right? The law was given to kind of, part of the law I guess, was to make them separate or different.
Yeah, we say that the fourth, so we have the mirror curb in the guide, and in the Old Testament, maybe you'd say a hedge was maybe the fourth. I want you to be different than the rest of the nations to show them who is the only true God and what nation has the only true God and who is coming from that nation. That ultimately the Savior of the world was going to come from that nation. So again, in that sense, we're trying in these lessons to kind of try to sort of give the Pharisees the benefit of the doubt a little bit and say, okay, again, God did tell them to be different, to be separate. But now here, it's not just being separate from the other nations. They were, even among their own people, starting to separate themselves. And you again just see where this led when it got off the tracks a little bit, or a lot bit.
Were the Pharisees kind of like what became priests, or were the priests another class entirely?
So the temple priests were the Sadducees. The Pharisees would have been involved in the synagogue, the local churches, so to speak. So the Sadducees really kind of went away after Rome destroyed the temple. They die off pretty quick after that because there was no temple to do their work in anymore. Where the Pharisees continued. The Pharisees today would be the rabbinic Jews. If you follow like a timeline, the hyper-Orthodox Jews would be kind of descended from the mindset of the Pharisees. They continued on because they didn't need a temple. They were able to fulfill the Torah right in your local synagogue, in your local congregation.
Are they the curly sideburns?
Yeah, the folks who are really the
Yeah.
Orthodox, that would be, not that they're blood descendants, but in the mindset of the Pharisees, the spiritual mindset, that continued on even without the temple there, where the Sadducees sort of went away when the temple was destroyed. So what would Jesus do? Remember Dan Mortensen had the bracelet, right?
WWJD, I'm ready.
JD, yeah.
I got nothing wrong with the phrase. It was a favorite slogan or question some Christians asked to help them decide what they should do or how they should react or in whatever situation they face. So, sounds logical, wholesome. Is there a danger, however, in focusing on that refrain?
You can't do what Jesus would do because
Right.
Jesus
It's
is
perfect.
perfect, so whatever decision you make would kind of might be a problem because that might not be something that Jesus would do because he makes the perfect decision, so, and you can't.
You're not God. So, yeah, maybe that's one that is so obvious we don't think about it, but
Yeah.
do you really know what Jesus would do? Because there's a lot of times he does things you say, oh, I wouldn't have reacted like that. Because he's the Holy Son of God, and he knows the perfect decision to make every time. So there would be one where it's kind of a hard standard to live up to, if you're always wondering what Jesus would do.
Trends close to work righteousness.
Trends close to work righteousness. And expand on that a little bit. Yeah, why?
Start maybe focusing on doing the good works to, not because of your salvation, but to contribute. You know, you might, just feels like it leans that way a little bit. I mean, not, if you take it too far, like you said.
I think of the hymn, Your works, not mine, O Christ, bring gladness to this heart. They tell me all is done, they bid my fear depart. Your works, not mine, O Christ. So again, on the surface, not wrong, but if that's all I'm thinking all the time, what would Jesus do? How can I be like Jesus? What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? Someone suggested once, maybe change it to WDJD.
What did?
What did Jesus do? And then maybe have along with that a WWJD, but put that other one not. What did Jesus do? And then what would Jesus do kind of would be secondary. Understanding I don't know exactly what he would do, but I know the principles he's laid out for me in the Bible. So help me with what I do know, do what I think you've called me to do from what I read in here. And if I'm not wrong, then forgive my hidden faults. Now, anybody else on that concept of WWJD?
There's a risk if somebody sees you wearing that wristband and then they see you do something sinful.
Well, that's true too, you know. You have just put kind of a target on yourself. So you got to live up to that then.
Which is a good goal, but not achievable.
Yeah, beware if someone accuses you of being a hypocrite.
I got in this kind of at the end, but to me, it would be a kind of a reminder for you, for yourself throughout the day. You know, you start getting worked up and getting in the ways of the world, and you look down and you see that.
Yeah.
I think that's what the purpose was for it
Yeah.
all along, it's
Yeah.
just,
And that way I think it's good where I'm a child of God.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not of the world, you know, that don't want to, it's easy to start thinking like everyone else, but no, I want to think like this.
And like Fred said, it's a double-edged sword, you gotta be careful.
Right. Yeah, as long as we can understand the phrase knowing the works I do, as much as they might be like Jesus' works, are not going to be what redeems me or brings me any more credit in God's eyes than what Christ has already given me, then I think it's fine, but keep it in that perspective. And that can be difficult to keep it in that perspective. It becomes all about my works, all about what I do. Keep trucking here. The Pharisees' separation from and influence over the common people made them inherently hypocritical. And it's true, they spoke out against hypocrisy, condemning it within their own ranks. They called for humility. You know, the Bible is clear on that. But still, in practice, their separation from everyone unclean fostered a better than thou spirit, which is hypocritical on its face. We've talked about that Ash Wednesday gospel, the Pharisee and the tax collector, where Jesus kind of exposes that. The Pharisee could readily count the ways he was separated from other people, including that vile tax collector standing in abject humility at a distance. And he was quick to remind God how he fasted and tithed. He concluded, as did the people to whom Jesus told the parable, that what he did in obeying the law made him right with God. He could see no flaws in himself. Certainly not the flaw of his contempt for others who did not live up to the same standards as he. Remember the first verse of that parable. To those who were confident in their own righteousness, Jesus told this parable. I'm glad that first verse is there. Here's who he's addressing when he gives that parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. Those who were confident in their own righteousness. Meanwhile, the tax collector casts his eyes downward, pounds his chest, cries, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Notice that little footnote there in the Greek. Technically, it's got a definite article. He calls himself the sinner. I am the sinner. I'm it. I'm the worst of the worst. I'm not comparing myself to anyone. I'm the sinner. Me. I'm not here to talk about anybody but me. Didn't offer God a life worth saving. No evidence he should be considered right with God. But he called for mercy from him who alone could save. And that's when Jesus says this is the man who went home justified before God rather than the other. I think number 3 we got a good grasp of, the essential difference in the way the two men believed they would achieve righteousness. It's either you or it's not at the end of the day. It's you or Christ. And think of every other world religion. It's you, in essence. You got to do this. You got to make this sacrifice. You got to offer this. You got to pray this many times a day. You got to make your pilgrimage. You got to whatever. It's you. Do. Don't. The Pharisees, in separating from the Gentiles, reflected yet another flaw in their thinking that drove a wedge between them and Jesus. In their separation, they misunderstood and misapplied what it meant for them to be the children of Abraham. If we turn to Genesis 12, instead of recognizing their birthright from God was the promise of the Messiah to be born of Jewish parents in the line of King David, they saw it as a bloodline that preserved a favorable relationship with God. These will be reasonably familiar words from Genesis 12. The call of Abram. God could have picked anyone he wanted to pick from the sons of Noah to be the forerunners of the Messiah. He chose this guy named Abram. Genesis 12, 1-3. Dean's got it back there, shaking his head.
The Lord had said to Abraham, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you.
Okay. Identify and explain the words that point to the significance of what it meant to be children of Abraham or Abram.
Blessed.
Okay. Blessings. Bless those who bless you.
Get back at people who don't treat you right.
Okay. Those who are your enemies will be my enemies, and I'll curse those who curse you and dishonor you.
Giving them a big head. Like you're setting them up like on this pedestal. Look at how great I'm gonna make you above everybody else.
It could be, yeah. I mean, if you don't check your sinful nature, Abraham could have been like, oh, I'm pretty special, that God would give this promise to me. As we follow Abraham's life, we see how he definitely had his struggles like anybody else with the promises of God, especially when it's taken a while for him to. So what's the deal with this whole having a kid thing? This is what, he's 75? In the next verse, he's 75 years old. Remember, it's not for another quarter of a century before they finally do. Sarah conceives and has a child. The three visitors come, Sodom and Gomorrah, remember that whole story? And why is she laughing? What's the deal? Next year at this time, I'm coming back and she's gonna have a child. But that was when he was 99 when that happened. How about the whole,
I'm gonna say, when did Abram become Abraham?
I'm trying to remember what year. Father of nation, was it father of many and then father of nations? Abram versus Abraham. It's just a slight difference in.
Yeah, so it's like it's.
I'm trying to remember exactly when that happened. Let me look here. Chapter 17. Yeah.
Covenant.
Covenant of circumcision. There you go. Verse 5. Your name will be not Abram, but Abraham, for I have made you the father of a large group of nations. So, 99 years old, 24 years later. Goes along with the whole promise of the son to be born.
Name change every 100 years.
Yeah. The whole all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. That's what makes our ears perk up when we hear that today. That someday from this line of Abraham, everyone who walks on the earth will be blessed. I'm not sure how much Abraham maybe understood that at the time when you're first hearing that. But you and I can look back and say, oh, he's talking about Jesus there. From the line of Abraham, this is the ultimate fulfillment of why God chose Abraham, because from this bloodline, today in the town of David, a Savior will be born to you. And there's the reason why in the Old Testament you keep getting those genealogies, right? Where let's just make sure we're keeping this line going here and understand why this is so important.
Aha.
What's that?
Go back and blame
Epiphany.
somebody, right?
Oh.
Epiphany moment. So I kind of always thought it was Abraham, but it's not. It's Jesus.
For what?
From the line that will be blessed. All nations,
Oh.
all people will be blessed.
Yeah, all people will be blessed. So, yes, I would say through you, Abraham, the greatest blessing in the world is going to come one day.
But it was nothing Abraham did.
No.
Did really.
Yeah, this whole thing here is God's grace.
Yeah.
And that's where later on, when Paul is talking about in Galatians, so frustrated with the Jews, he says, what covenant came first, the one made at Sinai or the one made with Abraham? The one at Sinai was 430 years later. And that was a two-way, you do this, I do that, here's the laws, if you do this, you'll be my people. The one with Abraham was, you do nothing, Abraham. I have chosen you because I wanted to, and one day all nations will be blessed through you, and you just get to enjoy it. Paul says, so, ergo, Jews, you love Abraham, right? You know Abraham. Why are you putting more emphasis on Moses than you are Abraham? When that one came way before Moses. Which is the law or the gospel? Moses or Abraham? So, the same question could be asked to a Pharisee. But let's go back to your point before, Dean, also. There's no denying that the Israelites were special in God's eyes. You are my chosen people. You're the apple of my eye. I've carried you on eagle's wings. All those Old Testament beautiful phrases that, no, they didn't certainly always act like it, and they did plenty to get him pretty upset with them. But he continues to go out of his way to protect them and preserve them and help them. But understand all of that came to a climax when Jesus came into the world. And now the point of Abraham has been fulfilled. When the Son of God, Galatians 4, right, when the time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under law, to redeem those under law. Now the time has come. The Pharisees just refused to see that. No matter what Jesus did, they refused to see it. John the Baptist has the same issue, back to your sheets. He pinpoints the flaws in the Pharisees and Sadducees when they come to where he's preaching and baptizing. He denounced them as a brood of vipers, and he says, don't think you can say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our father. Let's turn to John 8. So John knew exactly what was going through their heads also, John the Baptist. Big, long discourse here with Jesus and the Pharisees. So back in verse 13, you see who he's addressing. The Pharisees said to him, "You testify about yourself. Your testimony is not valid." So that's who is the other side of this conversation. Why don't we read 31 through 39? Well, let me see here. I wonder if we can even go back a few. Let's go back to 25. 25 through 39. You're going to do it?
Sure. Who are you, they asked. Jesus replied, "What I've been telling you from the beginning. I have many things to say and to judge concerning you. But the one who sent me is true, and what I heard from him, these are the things I am telling the world." They did not understand what he was talking to them about. They did not understand that he was talking to them about the Father. So Jesus said to them, "When you lift up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am the one, and that I do nothing on my own, but I speak exactly as the Father taught me. The one who sent me is with me. He has not left me alone, because I always do what pleases him." He was saying these things, and many believed in him. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, "If you remain in my word, you are really my disciples. You will also know the truth, and the truth will set you free." "We are Abraham's descendants," they answered. We have never been slaves of anyone. How can you say you will be set free?" Jesus answered, "Amen, amen, I tell you, anyone who keeps committing sin is a slave to sin. But a slave does not remain in the family forever. A son does remain forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will really be free. I know you are Abraham's descendants, yet you are looking for a way to kill me because there is no place for my word in you. I am telling you that I have seen at the side of the Father. As for you, you do what you have heard at the side of your father." "Our father is Abraham," they answered. "If you are Abraham's children," Jesus told them, "you would do the works of Abraham." Okay, so you got kind of this mixed crowd now. He's talking, and some people are like, "Oh, that kind of is starting to make sense." And so some suggest is that some of the Pharisees were beginning to see things Jesus' way, and then by the end, if you look at the end of the chapter, the Jews replied, "You aren't even 50 years old. You've seen Abraham. I tell you, before Abraham was born, I am." The I am equating himself to Jehovah, right? Then they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus was hidden and left the temple area. So if this is some people who believed in him, it was just for a short time, it seems. Because by the end of the chapter, they are all ready to stone him to death. So, or is he's kind of talking to a mixed crowd? You have some people who are believing in him, and then you have the Pharisees all there too yet. And the Pharisees certainly don't believe in him. He laid bare the problem, considering their legacy as children of Abraham as a spiritual badge of honor. And when he called for them to learn and hold to his teachings, "The truth will set you free," they countered, "We're Abraham's descendants and have never been slaves of anyone." Jesus drives home the point: everyone who sins is a slave to sin. And by choosing Abraham over him, they separated themselves from Abraham and him. "Abraham's our father," they insisted. By clinging to Abraham in this way, they followed another father, but not Abraham and not God. What is he referring to when he says, if you were Abraham's children, you would do what Abraham did?
You would have faith.
Yeah,
Abraham had amazing faith.
yeah. The whole thing with sacrificing Isaac, right? And Romans 4, maybe keep your finger here and turn to Romans 4 or 5, I think 4. We'll find out when we get there. Pretty sure it's 4.
Chapter 4 and 5. We'll get
Yeah, well, eventually. 4, there we go. Maybe just the first, really, we could do the whole chapter, but how about just the first 8 verses? Romans 4, 1 through 8.
I'll take it.
Fred's got that, excuse me.
What then shall we say that Abraham, our forefather according to the flesh, discovered in this matter? If in fact Abraham was justified by works, he had something to boast about, but not before God. What does Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Now to the one who works, wages are not credited as a gift, but as an obligation. However, to the one who does not work but trusts God, who justifies the ungodly, their faith is credited as righteousness. David says the same thing when he speaks of the blessedness of the one to whom God credits righteousness apart from works. Blessed are those whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the one whose sin the Lord will never count against them.
Okay. So, pretty cut and dry there. If you were Abraham's children, you would do what Abraham did. At least that's exactly right. Abraham had faith. He wasn't saved by anything he did. He was saved by the God who chose him. Abraham believed God, and what's the it? It was faith, right? That was credited to him as righteousness. It was credited to him as righteousness. That's a quote from Genesis. Every Pharisee should have known that. So here, Jesus talking about the freedom that he's come to bring, and they're just all locked up in this whole, we're descendants of Abraham. Well, yeah, I know you're descendants of Abraham, but not spiritually, because you don't agree with this fact that by faith, it will be credited to you as righteousness. The Son has come to really set you free.
Don't they consider themselves also descendants of Israel, so they were slaves?
Well, that's true too.
Like,
that's
you
kind
can't
of
say we've never been slaves to anybody.
pretty
Yeah,
sure for 400 years
pretty
you were
sure you
slaves
were.
in Egypt. Yeah, right. Yeah, that national pride. But you're exactly right. They were enslaved for a long time in Egypt. Pharisees were separatists. They used their relationship with Abraham as a reason to reject Jesus, sent from God. They followed another father that Jesus isn't afraid to tell them straight up, you belong to your father, the devil, he says in chapter 8, verse 44. We mentioned how in verse 13 they were identified, and clearly they're the ones who perpetuate this way of thinking. Jesus said to these men, I know you are Abraham's descendants, yet you're looking for a way to kill me because you have no room for my word. Who were the ones who wanted to kill Jesus? Following another encounter with him, they being the Pharisees, went out and plotted how they might kill him. So, thinking it was enough to claim Abraham as their father, the separatists found themselves separated from the truth of God in Christ. And the clash between the Pharisees and Jesus could hardly have been more severe. They claimed he was in league with the devil. He told them they were sons of the devil. He said they did not know God, or else they would know and believe him. And then they tried to kill him. Remember, that's one of his demon driving out episodes. They look to him and say, it is only by the power of Beelzebub that you drive out demons. And that's that section where he says, I paraphrase, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Why would the devil drive himself out? What are you talking about? That makes no sense. How is the devil winning if he's driving himself out? Of course I'm not from the devil. But they were so entrenched in their hatred that they started calling him the Lord of the Flies, calling him the Prince of Demons. Okay, some points to ponder.
So
Math,
the Pharisees are like that because they didn't believe that Jesus was the one coming to save them from their sins and all that kind of stuff. And they still don't believe his coming. Okay.
Yeah. You can, imagine Jesus' frustration. Now, of course, he's the Son of God and he knows everything, and he knew they weren't going to believe in him, but I think it helps you appreciate, the hen gathering her chicks under her wings. I've longed to do this, but you were not willing. What else could Jesus literally have done to prove all those miracles he did, all the teaching he did, he's going out of his way. These are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, all the works that Jesus did.
Yeah.
And yet, it just made everything he did, they turned up their hatred, to another notch. It's crazy when you think about it, but that's the foolishness of unbelief. It's happening right in front of their face. And
Could part of it be they're trying to analyze everything and use their brains, and where you can't do with faith?
yeah, I think at the end of the day, Pilate had it right. They were envious of him. Crowds were coming out to him. People were
Political.
Yeah, some of that. The message he had was a lot of, trust God, trust in me. A lot of forgiveness and love and grace. And again, not that he got rid of the law. No, he was at every Sabbath day. He would have done what he was supposed to do. He kept the law better than any Pharisee could ever keep it. And that just didn't fly with their message for the people. That was not how they operated. A lot of freedom, and they didn't like freedom. They wanted, here's the rules. They lock you down. Yeah.
Didn't he use the word for God that they're never supposed to use? And he called himself.
With
that?
I
He said,
am,
I am.
yeah, the I am is, they don't utter the name Jehovah.
Right,
Yeah.
and he said that's who he was.
Yeah, because he is who he is, and I am, and that's
Before
where-
Abraham was, I am.
Yeah, I've always been.
That's when they picked up the stones.
That's when they picked up the stones. Yeah, that was. It's one thing but you start comparing yourself. That's the blasphemy charge. He claims to be God. He doesn't just claim it. Yeah, he is God.
Kind of makes you wonder though, what did they think the Savior would be like? You know, he showed them all these things and taught them all these things and they couldn't believe it, so.
Probably they
So what are they
would think it'd
waiting
be
for?
like,
Right, what are they waiting for? Yeah.
Yeah.
What,
But he was supposed to be the
like an earthly king where you come in the pomp and the glory like the king.
Yeah, I think that's,
In his chariot.
this is just a
All the
normal.
pomp and ceremony.
The Jewish faith today is very much, at least we use that like the millennium, the whole 1,000-year reign of. So a Christian some Christians believe it's not the correct doctrine, but they believe that from Revelation they take it very literally, and there'll be this 1,000-year reign where Jesus comes back. And in the Jewish mind, it's very millennial in the sense that they think the Messiah is going to come to re-prosper Jerusalem, bring peace to God's people. As we've read Isaiah, those of you in women's Bible study, I think you get a sense when you read all those Old Testament prophets and the Messianic, the wolf and the lamb will lie together, and all these pictures of joy and peace and prosperity, and God's people will be blessed. And we look at that and say, well, let's talk about heaven. That's talking about the ultimate deliverance. They look at that as, no, this is what the Messiah is going to come to bring. When he returns, he's going to, or when he comes, in their mind, he is going to the kingdom of David will be restored. Temple will be rebuilt. It's very much an earthly, kind of heaven on earth thing. And of course, Jesus says, I didn't come to do that. And
David wasn't that great.
no, well, that's the thing, yeah. But it's very, very similar to kind of that Baptist theology of the 1,000-year reign. But the Baptists would say that's Christ coming back. The Jew says Messiah eventually, when he comes, he's going to be the one to do that. What else? I would say we should do Matthew, but I think that's going to come up in a later. Yeah, that's lesson 9. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because then we don't need to do lesson 9. So let's look at Matthew 7 and Romans 16. Compare and contrast the separation called for by God and the activity of the Pharisees that earned them their name as separatists. Matthew 7:15 and Romans 16:17. Doesn't matter the order.
I got the 15.
Okay.
Let's watch out for false prophets. Watch out for false prophets that come to you. How far do you want me to go on this?
15.
Till you feel you've said enough.
I would not say that. Oh my word.
And I'm giving you Christian
Is the
freedom.
rumbling all done now?
We don't live under the law, Jim. You read as much as you want to
Watch
read.
out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. You do not gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles, do you? So then every good tree produces good fruit, but a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree cannot produce bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot produce good fruit. Every tree that does not produce good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. So then by their fruit you will recognize them.
Okay. All right. Watch out for those who don't, false prophets, right? Look, you'll know by watching them. You'll know by what they teach. Just listen. Romans 16:17. One of the last verses of Romans. We got that one.
I've got it.
All right, this is as we talk about our fellowship principles, this is one of the proof passages for that.
I urge you, brothers, to watch out for those who cause divisions and put obstacles in your way that are contrary to the teaching you have learned. Keep away from them.
Okay, so go back, for those of you who were around, the whole Wells, Missouri Synod, when they broke apart, right, the debate, and one of the reasons why we have the CLC, the Church of the Lutheran Confession, Eau Claire headquarters, right? They formed when they believed the Wells did not the Wells did not listen to Romans 16 quickly enough. They were too patient. They tried to work with Missouri for too long. They should have cut ties earlier. I think it ended up being like a 4 or 5 year process. And they said, you waited too long. So the Church of the Lutheran Confession is kind of an offshoot from that whole controversy from the Wells and LCMS.
So they technically, the teachings of Wells,
It's 100% the same teachings of the Wells, except for still to this day, we can't be in fellowship because you guys didn't break from Missouri fast
so
enough.
mad at us?
I never,
Wow,
I never heard of that.
I never heard of it either.
It's not real big. Like I say, Eau Claire is a seminary. I don't know, I'd have to
So
look.
that-
And look how many church, they can't even be 100. I wouldn't, maybe a couple hundred.
Small.
So we're really not the most strict one.
So yeah, technically there's
More
one
than
stricter.
us.
Wow.
So if anyone accuses you of that, say at least I'm that's. You know, do they have a point? It's kind of the point of this question.
85.
85
85
congregations.
congregations.
Okay. Ketchikan, Alaska had one, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah,
Oh, there's one in Alaska?
Yeah, Ketchikan was.
Canada, there's missions in Canada, India, Africa, Nepal, and Myanmar as well. So
Yeah. Now, I obviously was not alive for the split between Wells and Missouri. Some of you were, though.
When did that happen? 40s or 50s?
50s.
50s,
Yeah.
50s, yeah, I think it finalized late 50s.
Yeah, I know it broke apart families, you know, it was a big
Oh,
deal.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of relatives that were in Missouri,
Yeah.
still do.
Well, even in the late sixties and early seventies, I was conservative Missouri Synod, and there was angst about, you know, we might not serve communion to people from that Missouri Synod church because they're not right.
Right.
they're not right.
I remember I was a teenager, so I was like a usher or something at some convocation, and there was, now we're gonna do this, you know, so watch for that.
Right. And that, I mean, that was one of the big issues was unfortunately Missouri, you kind of don't know what you were going to get after a while. There were some churches that were very, you know, confessional and true to the word of God. And then you go a couple towns away and depending on the pastor and what the seminaries you graduated from, and you have one that maybe wasn't quite as conservative, and you can't have that inconsistency. And so that was what was, in the, you know, scouting and the lodge. There's some other issues too, but that was one of the big ones that you guys got to get your house in order. And Missouri has a different view of church and ministry where the local congregation and the local pastor is the divinely, I gotta say this right, the divinely ordained church, and the divinely ordained ministry is the church, the local congregation, and the local pastor. And everything kind of flows through that. So you can have, you know, two churches that, depending on who's in charge, might not say the same thing.
The Thursday Bible study, some of us went to a rummage sale just kitty corner across the street, and the woman that lives there, we said that we were at Bible study and just at the church down the street and stuff, so she's Missouri Synod.
Mhm.
They drive 45 minutes to go to church every Sunday morning, but they drive past our church. And so we encourage her to stop in and check us out, and
Yeah, not
They're
trying
Missouri
to.
Synod and they drive 45 minutes.
yeah, so where's it, Missouri?
There's two in town. There's one over by.
Well, I know, there's one in
south,
Plover, there's
and
one in
there's the big
Point.
ones downtown. Or
There's one in Amherst.
Probably don't
It's
like the
that's not
minister.
45 minutes
that
away.
could be.
Yeah.
One of you had your hand
But
up?
they're all different.
Did you ever?
I did, I was just gonna say, all I remember about those times, I think I was a teenager, just barely. But all I remember, my stepmom was a minister's daughter. Okay, and I remember her and arguing with my other relatives that were Missouri, and Hey, hey, hey.
Sticks
Kids
in
just
your
went
head.
on and played, you know?
Old Jordan signs on Missouri Synod, except for Dad.
Except he went away from it, man.
That caused some issues.
I imagine that caused a
But
few.
yeah, it was a little turbulence back then.
So again, not being alive and not being privy to those discussions, you know, part of you does appreciate Titus talks about warn a divisive person once and then warn him a second time. And after that, have nothing to do with him. So I could imagine perhaps the other perspective is we're trying to sit down, we're trying to have talks, we're trying to get someone to see, hey, your house is out of order. Can we help you clean it up? And I pray that's maybe where the Wisconsin folks were coming from, that we're trying to warn you. But there does come a point where you have to say, okay, time to shake the dust off your feet and move on to the next town, so to speak.
So we were on that Lutheran narrow middle road, right?
Yeah.
'Cause the other ditch is, I'm trying to remember, I probably need help with the verses, but wasn't it Jesus that said, I came not to call or whatever the righteous, but the
But sinners.
sinners,
Yeah.
or something like that?
Yeah.
And then he said it's not the healthy that need a doctor, but the sick.
Right.
So he certainly
Something to be said for patience.
hung out with
Right.
it too, you know. Pastor Weber used to go to the bar.
Yeah. Isaiah, the bruised reed he will not break, the smoldering wick he will not snuff out. Now, is there a difference between an individual sinner and an entire church body? Maybe a little, when an entire church body is having issues, that's not talking about individual souls. That's, hey, you as a unit, we gotta talk here. And maybe the patience isn't quite as long when someone's in error and not confessing it. So what's the point of that discussion? Compare the separation called for by God and the activity of the Pharisees. So I guess, yeah, that's the point, the Pharisees had gotten so, there was no room for discussion. There was no room for patience. There was no room for understanding the plight of the sinner. And that really made them and Jesus, the whole point of this is irreconcilable, right? They words like mercy and grace and love weren't really in their vocabulary as you read about them. They were about laws and rules and right and wrong and do this or else.
Like Adriana said, was there any outreach in the Old Testament Jewish?
No, you came to them if you wanted to be Gentiles could certainly, to an extent, become part. You had to get circumcised. There's a certain part of the temple that the Gentiles couldn't go any. The courtyard for the Gentiles was outside, so it was more you come to us, and then we'll make you one of us and tell you the rules you got to do to become part of us. From my understanding, there wasn't a lot of, because they separated themselves from the Gentiles. Right? We're not going to send a missionary over to Philistia and see if we can convert Goliath's family.
Does the Jewish
That would be a big
people or
one.
religion dwindle down as far as members because of that? Within
I don't
themselves?
know. That's a good
Because
question.
they're not adding or not trying to bring more people in?
I suppose the
Yeah, I don't
older
think even today.
generation is gone and the younger ones aren't continuing. It's like the synagogue downtown.
Yeah.
I'm sure that was it was booming at one point in time. Now it's a museum.
All right.
Still the one in
I
Wass.
would imagine the birth rate probably kept up with the death rate in those days.
I know a lot of folks today they're Jewish, but they don't really follow all the ritual. You have your bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah, and you do kind of the special things, but they wouldn't be rabbinic Orthodox, wear the hair like this and wear the phylacteries. But I still, as far as I know, they don't do a ton of outreach. You come to us if you want to learn more.
And then are those people then still treated differently? Like you're not, like once you're one of us,
Mhm.
are you really fully one of us?
Right.
Like
Is there
that,
still a
the
separation?
different place for the Gentiles, were they ever then allowed, were they ever able to do enough to be allowed to go further into the temple, or were they always considered a Gentile?
Yeah, that'd be, I bet you the oral law has something to say about that. Let me look, see if I can find an answer. How does a Gentile who becomes a Jew today, are they considered still separate the way they were back then, or is there?
We don't have a temple anymore to separate.
Right.
I don't think the synagogues.
In the local synagogue, yeah, does a Gentile can't do things that a Jew can do just because of their lineage? I'm sure I can find an answer to that, so.
We've been out in Mill Creek since '77. Token Lutherans were still considered the outsiders. We always will be.
Yeah,
That's the way it is.
Well, that's because everybody's related out there to each other.
Oh, boy.
It's a farming community.
that's the way it used to be, kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Town of Carson, Weston Point.
Oh,
They call it the Mill Creek community.
Is that because of your
And there's a
religion, or
plan that
because
there's
you're
a
just not
Mill
part of the
Creek
family?
plan.
Yes.
Mill Creek plan.
Are there Catholics out there? Catholic community?
What's that?
That's a Catholic area?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's a big Catholic area. St. Bartholomew's.
Oh, sure, yeah. I suppose I should go. Maybe just number 3 real quick. Conservative Lutherans are often known for being against this or that. Isn't that what you're, you're the guys who are against everything.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Oh,
No.
you're the
But now
strict,
there's one worse than us.
you're the strict one. You're the
Sleep
second
well
strict one.
tonight. Now, of course, there are scriptural reasons for being against things that might promote false teaching or against someone who promotes sin. If we focus most on what we are against, it can be easy to slide into some hypocrisy and self-righteousness. So Dean, I think, mentioned earlier the narrow Lutheran middle road, right? To always remember kind of this, well, what is the narrow Lutheran middle road when it comes to this? That will keep us from accepting false teaching or sin, or on the other hand, becoming self-righteous.
humility.
That's maybe a good one, yeah. There, but for the grace of God, go I, right? Thank you for giving me your teachings and your word. Thank you for putting me in a church body that doesn't apologize for your word, that, we have the truth and we cling to the truth. Not being afraid to back down when, false teaching happens, but don't let it get to your head and you guys all stink. And we're the good ones. And that's where Jesus would say, come to me. I've come to call sinners, not the righteous. So finding that balance, and maybe humility is one of the best words to use. Just remember who you are. Remember that it's only by God's grace you have what you have too. Way to go, Jan. Can't say it any better. Good job, Jan. All right.
Well, then you better think of that.
Oh, somebody's birthday today.
Whose birthday is it today? Oh my goodness. Birthday boy.
Yeah.
Officially a senior citizen.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Dean. Happy birthday to you.
Nice flourish.
So were you named
I
after
did
Dean
just-
Martin?
Yes.